Somewhere between 250 and 320 million years ago, an asteroid hit southern Ohio. It punched a crater several miles across, then time went to work on it. Buried it, eroded it, flattened it out so completely that the geologists who came along later spent decades calling it a sunken mountain or an old volcano or anything but what it actually was. Thousands of years ago, long after that, people walked out under the rim of that buried crater and built a quarter-mile-long snake out of piled earth. Nobody can agree on who they were. That's not a marketing line. It's an open argument and it's still going on. This is Serpent Mound. It's outside of Pebbles in Adams County, about 70 miles east of Cincinnati, on a plateau above Ohio Bush Creek. Last episode was Fort Ancient, 3.5 miles of earthen walls, the Hopewell put on a hilltop about 2,000 years ago. And as I mentioned there, one of Ohio's first World Heritage Sites, inscribed in 2023 along with 7 other Hopewell earthworks in Ohio. Serpent Mound wasn't on that list. It's a different kind of site, built by a different culture, on a date that nobody has ever managed to pin down. It's been on its own tentative list since 2008, the best known ancient site in Ohio, still waiting to be let in. So let's start with the snake itself. It runs about 1,348 feet. Head to tail, roughly a quarter mile. 7 coils in the body, a tight curled tail at one end, and an open mouth at the other, wrapping around a hollow oval about 120 feet long. It's not tall, a few feet high at most. If you stand next to it at ground level, you're basically looking at a long, low, curving ridge of grass. And it's genuinely hard to tell you're looking at anything at all. That's why, back in 1908, they built an observation tower on the site. The shape only reads from above. 2 surveyors, named Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis, made the first accurate map of it in 1840. It ran in the first book the Smithsonian ever published. They looked at the oval at the head and decided it was an egg, and that the snake was in the act of swallowing it. Other people have called it the sun, or an eye. One 19th century archaeologist decided the head was a frog and the oval was the frog's body. So egg, sun, eye, or frog. 4 experts, 4 answers, 1 oval. Now back to what it's sitting on. The plateau under Serpent Mound isn't normal ground. It's the eroded remains of an impact crater, the spot that an asteroid or comet came down a few 100 million years ago. For a long time, nobody could explain the geology here. The rock layers are scrambled. Material that should be deep underground is sitting near the surface. Early geologists guessed volcano. Later ones, a collapsed underground structure. It took modern survey work, some of it done in 2003, to confirm it was an impact. It's one of only about 24 confirmed impact sites in the entire country. There's a national landmark designation on the crater, separate from anything to do with the mound. The people who built the Serpent had no way of knowing any of that. They couldn't have known about the asteroid, and they had no way to see what the rock was doing underneath them. But of all the ground in southern Ohio, this is where they chose to build the largest effigy they ever made. Which brings us to the actual mystery. For more than 100 years, the answer was Adena. The Adena culture was in this area from 800 BCE to about 100 CE, and they built burial mounds, including a couple right next to the serpent, so the logic was reasonable. Adena mounds here, Adena serpent, case closed. The problem is the serpent itself is basically empty. When Frederick Putnam, a Harvard archaeologist, dug into it in the 1880s, he found almost nothing inside. No burials, no tools, none of the artifacts you'd normally use to date something. The Adena answer was really a guess based on the neighbors. Then in 1991, a team pulled charcoal out of a mound and ran it through radiocarbon dating. It came back around 1,000 years old, roughly 1070 CE. That's not Adena. That points to a completely different and much later people, the Fort Ancient culture, which is the thread I promised you at the end of the last episode. The Fort Ancient culture took its name from the site we just walked, and they never built a foot of it. The Hopewell did. They just moved into the walls 1,000 years later. So one of the 2 leading candidates for building this serpent is a people named after somewhere they had nothing to do with. For a while, it looked like the 1991 date had settled the argument. Then, in 2014, another team took new samples, ran new dates, and got around 300 BCE, which swung the whole thing back to the Adena. At which point, one of the archaeologists from 1991 study, Brad Lepper, basically said, not so fast. He argued the 2014 samples weren't clean charcoal. They were organic sediment pulled from soil cores, and that kind of sample can read thousands of years too old. He also pointed out that the Adena aren't really known for effigy mounds or snake imagery at all, but the Fort Ancient people are. So where does that leave us? 2 scientific dates, more than 1,000 years apart, and the man who worked on the older one saying neither carbon date can actually settle it, which is an honest thing for a scientist to say about his own field. There's one more layer, and it's the one that pulls the crowds. In the 1980s, a pair of researchers, Clark and Marjorie Hardman, worked out that the head of the serpent lines up with the point on the horizon where the sun sets on the summer solstice. On the longest day of the year, from the right spot, the sun goes straight down through the open jaws and across the oval. The coiled tail at the other end appears to line up with the winter solstice. That much holds up fairly well. Where it gets shakier is the body. People have tried to match the three big curves to other solar events or to the cycle of the moon. The trouble is the curves are broad and sight lines are short. So the alignments are loose enough that you can make them point at a lot of things if you want it badly enough. And plenty of people want it badly enough. Serpent Mound pulls in a steady stream of folks with dowsing rods and theories about energy fields, and every solstice there's a gathering. But the summer solstice sunset is the alignment that actually holds up. It's the one worth being there for. For something this significant, Serpent Mound came very close to not surviving. In 1859, a tornado tore across the promontory and stripped it bare. After that, it got farmed. Cattle walked over it, plows ran across it, souvenir hunters dug into it and didn't bother filling the holes back in. A giant, one-of-a-kind, 1,000-plus-year-old monument was quietly eroding into a field because the people who owned the land had no particular reason to care. The person who did care was Putnam, a Harvard archaeologist who came out in the 1880s, saw how fast it was deflating, and decided it needed to be bought and protected. He didn't have the money, so the money got raised for him by a group of women in Boston who put up funds by subscription and purchased the site on behalf of Harvard. Sit with that for a second. The reason you can stand at Serpent Mound today is that a circle of women several hundred miles away in Boston decided a giant prehistoric snake in rural Ohio was worth saving and paid for it. Putnam excavated it, restored it to its original shape, and Harvard ran it as a public park until 1900, when it was handed over to the state of Ohio. It's been protected ever since. There's a museum built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s, and the tower and a path that keeps you off the mound itself. And one last thing that matters. This isn't just an artifact. For the Shawnee and for the native nations connected to the region, Serpent Mound is a sacred place. Not a former sacred place, a current one. The Shawnee tribe partners with the state on the site now, and they tell you plainly that they feel kinship with whoever built it. There are burial mounds around the serpent and unmarked graves. That's why you stay your path. Not for the grass, for the people. Last episode's site, Fort Ancient, is a World Heritage Monument we can mostly explain. Who built it, roughly when, roughly why. Serpent Mound is more famous, more striking, and by a wide margin, the one we understand least. We don't know for sure who made it, we don't agree on when, we can't fully explain why it's shaped the way it is, or sitting where it's sitting, and it's still sacred to living people, a couple thousand years on. If you want to read more about this one, there's a companion article over at my website, thebeardedvagabond.com. Links in the description. Next episode, we're staying south and going a lot farther back. Cowan Lake over in Clinton County. No walls, no effigies, just what's in the ground, and what was living here long before there was anyone around to pile up dirt in the shape of a snake. Subscribe if you want to see it. I'm Rex. That's Artemis. I'll see you on the next one. You're a good girl.